Hi everyone, my name is Stuart Elliott. I'm the CEO and the owner of Elliott Scott HR. Over the next few months, I'm going to do a little video series with my MDs around the world. And I thought I'd start with our newest member. With me today is Maidlin Mistry, who is based in Singapore. Maidlin, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Stu. Good morning or good afternoon from Singapore.
Good afternoon, yeah, from Singapore. Obviously, I said newest member. You joined us, what, was it October last year?
Yes, it was 3 months yesterday, precisely.
Now, obviously, you're best positioned to sort of tell everyone about yourself. So why don't you give everyone a little bit of a background in terms of yourself and how you ended up in Singapore?
How I ended up in Singapore, well, it's quite a long journey. So born and raised in Newcastle, although you probably can't tell that from the accent. And after 12 years in recruitment in the UK, working mainly in the Midlands, so across Leicester and Leamington Spa, I decided to take the jump and a bit of a leap of faith and take myself on my own off to sunny Melbourne, or 4 seasons in one day. And after 12 years in Melbourne, where I met my husband, who's also from Leicester, strange, small world sometimes, I got itchy feet and really wanted to explore Asia. And so I ended up in Singapore. I started my career in very junior accounting roles, then moved into office support, focusing really on sort of corporate secretaries and things like that, a little bit of legal, then went back to accounting, but then slowly specialized in more senior roles, and certainly latterly have really focused on C-level, not just within the finance realm, but in other disciplines as well. But always with a focus, certainly for the last 10 years, on commercially aligned roles that add value to the organization and also to the bottom line.
Yeah. And now for the last couple of years, obviously you've been focused towards HR. You moved to Singapore. Yep. and started recruiting in the HR field.
That's correct. I think what became very apparent to me in Singapore, although I did come initially to do accounting, we'll probably get to that later when we talk about the impact of COVID. I realized very quickly that the accounting market here is declining as organizations offshore. And I think with the impact of COVID, there is huge growth in the HR landscape as organizations move to really making sure that their most important asset, their people, are valued. So I can see huge growth across the HR landscape.
Yeah, because when you moved, obviously COVID hadn't happened from memory, and obviously You've been there now. In fact, majority of the time has been under COVID restrictions. Yep. How has it been in Singapore?
Look, I think people keep saying to me, oh, you haven't had the chance to see the real Singapore. But I think what it's actually given us the opportunity to do in terms of me and my husband is really explore Singapore. Obviously, we did have a circuit breaker, which was really challenging for everybody. And then we had a mini circuit breaker again. But the reality is the restrictions are in place. I think everybody has just accepted them. We still can go out with 5 people. We have to wear masks. I think really, looking into Raffles Place since Christmas, it's almost back to how it was. You certainly have to queue for your lunch again, so I think that's a sign that things are returning to normal.
I always love how much Singaporeans love their food, so it's nice. It's nice to hear that's happening. And then if we bring it back I suppose a little bit about sort of recruitment and what's happening there at the moment, how has COVID impacted things? Let's say first from a client perspective, and then secondly from a candidate perspective.
Yeah, so I think initially there was, from clients and candidates, there was just the huge fear of the unknown. So as soon as we went into that circuit breaker, everything just stopped. It did feel like the world had stopped. Obviously, clients weren't looking to hire. They were, trying to see what the impact was going to be on their business. Their focus was obviously on trying to retain as many employees as they could. Candidates were still very nervous about, were very nervous about moving. Clearly, if they felt they were in an organisation where they were tenured and they were being supported, they clearly didn't want to look outside because it was just the huge fear of the unknown. And I think that continued for most of 2020. So we started to see some movement in the back end of 2020. I think people sort of slowly adjusted to the new normal. The other thing, of course, was just the practicality of it. So once the market started moving, people just adjusting to, having interviews via Zoom or Teams. Obviously, people making hiring decisions on people they'd never met, and obviously then people having to adjust to onboarding remotely. So I had lots of very strange scenarios where I was having to follow up with HR departments to make sure people were getting laptops delivered or couriered to their homes. And then people were ringing me on the day one saying, my laptop hasn't arrived yet. And I'm saying, well, look at it as an additional day of holiday, you know. So it was some of those sorts of things. But then once we got to 2021, I think people started to breathe a sigh of relief. I think, you know, the restrictions eased. We were allowed out again. You know, we could start socializing again here in Singapore. And I think with that came a sense, you know, we survived the worst and things are going to get better. And then as we moved through 2021, you know, the market just started getting busier and busier, you know, and I think people who were probably poised to make that career move pre the pandemic had obviously then adjusted to that, staying in their role for an additional 2 years. So now we're looking at people who are looking for those moves at the 4 or 5 year mark, where perhaps they were ready to make a move at 2 or 3 years, depending on the point of time in their career. So I think, and also I think people have just realized, you know, yes, it's been awful and tough in some countries worse than others, but you know, the world hasn't ended, and there's a lot of optimism here. Really, there is.
And that's really nice to hear. And I think it's interesting when I listen to sort of stories about COVID around the world. There's lots of similarities to those stories, maybe different phases or different stages of the process that people went through, but very, very similar in terms of how companies adapted, how candidates have adapted, etc. Have you? One of the things I personally have seen a little bit is a few sort of expatriates moving. Have you seen a lot of that from Singapore? Have you seen a lot sort of moving away?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And you're right. Yes, we have seen people move away, but we're also seeing people move in, which is interesting. So
that's good to hear.
And you possibly don't see that so much other than outside the various expat groups I'm in on Facebook, looking at, you know, apartments, and there's a great one for furniture. So you see people looking for leases, people giving up leases, people, you know, clearing out their houses as they're going back to their home countries or even elsewhere in the world. But, you know, it seems to be balanced. And my real estate agent, who has probably got a finger on the pulse of the market, tells me that, you know, demand is outstripping supply. So, you know, I think again, lots of people who'd been here for a long time, I think maybe questioned being so far away from family and friends. And maybe that's impacted some decisions to leave, but equally there are people coming into Singapore.
And honestly, that's really lovely to hear, because I think that's the bit that people aren't sort of hearing and seeing sort of around the world at the moment. So that's a real positive. In terms of the I suppose predictions for 2022, do you have any? Is there anything that you would put out there to sort of candidates and clients at the moment?
Oh, predictions. Talent management and talent development is a very hot area. I think that's reflective of what I said earlier about organizations wanting to really value their best asset, their people, and also retention is key, particularly in Singapore, where we have a finite population and some roles are obviously in very short supply. So it's obviously about the employee engagement. How can we develop? How can we retrain? With the hastening of digitalization, again, there seems to be an ethos of retrain to retain rather than retrench, which I think is really positive as well. So talent management, talent development, and generalists with those skill sets as well. My prediction, it's going to continue to be very, very busy throughout the year. That's what I predict.
and honestly, I agree. If I look at some of the trends that we're seeing coming out, I think job numbers are on the increase in Singapore. If we take a new brief from what I'm seeing, and again, correct me if I've got this wrong, but it's a tight candidate market, is what we're saying. There's not an abundance of candidates out there, which makes it increasingly difficult for clients to hire really good people too.
Absolutely. The reality is that at the moment, I'm fortunate to be working with some superb people in different areas. The reality is that they're not just looking at opportunities I'm presenting them with. Good people are having multiple opportunities. So my advice to candidates is focus on the role you really want. Don't feel you have to take a role if it doesn't feel 100%. And to clients, you really need to move quickly once you've identified a good talent you want to hire.
Perfect. No, I think that's wonderful advice, Maidlin, and thanks for that. I'm always conscious of time. We try and keep these now to sort of 10 minutes. So I'm going to wrap everything up. But if anybody wants to get in touch with Maidlin in terms of the Singapore market, her details will appear on the screen right now in terms of email address and phone number. If you have any questions, my email is se@elliottScotthr.com. Thank you ever so much for this, Maidlin, and we'll be chatting very soon.
Thank you. Have a good day.